My son, who abandoned me for years, showed up on my doorstep a broken man, a gambling addict with loan sharks at his heels. They threatened to take his life. So I made a deal with the devil to save my son. My name is Simone Archer, and at 69, my life was measured by the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound that seemed to grow louder with each passing year. For 10 years, ever since my dear husband, David, was called to his eternal rest, that clock had been my primary companion. It marked the passing of days that were all largely the same, quiet, lonely, and punctuated by the hollow ache of a mother's forgotten love. My only son, Julian, was 40 years old now, a man I knew more from the glossy, curated images on his social media page than from the sound of his voice in my home. After David died, Julian, who had just started to find success in his sales career, had drifted away from me as if my grief were a contagious disease. His life became a whirlwind of business trips, fancy dinners, and vacations to sun-drenched places I could only dream of. He married a sharp, ambitious woman, and together they built a life so full, so busy, so important, that there was simply no room left for his old mother. The abandonment was not a single dramatic event, but a slow, creeping erosion of connection. The weekly phone calls became monthly, then dwindled to a perfunctory text on my birthday, usually a string of emojis sent by his wife. The invitations to holiday dinners stopped coming altogether. I was a loose thread from his old life, a life he was clearly eager to forget, and he had neatly snipped me away. My only connection to his world, to the life of my own grandchildren whom I had not held in years, was through the cold blue light of my tablet screen. I would scroll through his posts, a silent, invisible spectator to his happiness. I saw my grandson score the winning goal in his soccer championship. I saw my granddaughter go to her first school dance, looking so beautiful in a dress I wished I could have helped her choose. I saw their perfect, smiling family photos taken at expensive resorts, their arms around each other, a complete and happy unit that did not include me. Each like I tapped on a photo felt like a small, pathetic plea. Remember me. I'm still here. My faith was my only true sanctuary. The old, worn Bible on my nightstand, its pages soft as silk from decades of use, was my comfort. I would sit in my quiet living room, the house too big, too silent, and I would pray. I prayed for my son's health, for his happiness, for the well-being of the grandchildren I barely knew. And I prayed for my own heart, for the strength to endure this profound loneliness without letting it curdle into bitterness. I told myself it was my test, my cross to bear. A mother's love, I believed, was about forgiveness, about patience, about waiting with an open heart for a prodigal son to one day find his way home. The house itself was my last tangible connection to the life we once shared. It was the only significant asset David and I had ever owned, a sturdy, paid-off bungalow on a quiet street, filled with 40 years of memories. It was my security, my haven, the place where every corner held a ghost of David's laughter or a memory of a young Julian playing with his toy soldiers on the living room floor. It was all I had left of them, of us. I lived a simple life on my widow's pension, enough to pay the bills and keep food on the table. My days were quiet, measured by my gardening, my weekly Bible study, and the ticking of that old clock. I had accepted my lonely fate, resigned myself to a life lived on the periphery of my own family. I had no idea that my quiet, solitary world was about to be shattered, that my prodigal son was indeed coming home, not with apologies and open arms, but as a terrified fugitive, dragging the demons of his new life right to my doorstep. The faith I had so quietly nurtured was about to be tested not by loneliness, but by a danger so real, so immediate, it would force me to confront the true, terrifying cost of a mother's love. The knock on my door came late on a Tuesday night, long after I had said my prayers and settled into my armchair with a book. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a frantic, desperate pounding that rattled the very frame of the house. My heart seized in my chest. No one ever came to my door this late. With trembling hands I peered through the peephole. The face staring back was one I knew better than my own, but it was contorted into a mask of raw terror I had never seen before. It was Julian. My son. I fumbled with the locks, my hands shaking too much to manage the deadbolt at first. When I finally swung the door open, he practically fell inside, pushing past me and immediately locking the door behind him. He leaned against it, his chest heaving, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The man who stood before me was not the successful, confident son from the smiling social media photos. This man was a wreck. His expensive suit was rumpled and stained, his eyes wide and bloodshot, darting nervously towards the windows. He looked hunted. The faint, familiar scent of stale alcohol clung to him, but it was overshadowed by another sharper scent, the smell of pure animal fear. "Julian," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What is it? What's wrong?" He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his back pressed against the door as if he expected it to burst open at any moment. "Turn off the lights, Mom," he hissed, his voice a raw, cracked thing. "All of them." I did as he asked, my own fear a rising tide in my throat. I moved through my familiar home, flicking off the lamps until we were standing in the dim, gray light filtering in from the streetlights outside. "Now tell me what's happened, son," I said, my voice firmer now. He finally looked at me then, and the sight of his face so full of shame and terror broke my heart. "I messed up, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I messed up bad." He sank onto my sofa, burying his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with sobs he couldn't control. I sat beside him, my hand hovering, unsure if my touch was even welcome after all these years of silence. Finally, I just rested my hand on his back the way I used to when he was a little boy with a nightmare. His story, when it finally came out, was a sordid, tragic tale, a confession whispered in the dark of my quiet living room. The success, the lavish vacations, the perfect life he portrayed online, it had all been a lie, a house of cards built on a foundation of reckless, desperate gambling. He admitted, a sickness, a gambling addiction that had started small but had grown into a monstrous, insatiable beast that had consumed everything. His savings, his career, his marriage. His wife had left him months ago, taking the children, after she discovered he had drained their college funds. The business trips had been frantic, desperate trips to Las Vegas or Atlantic City, chasing a win that never came. "I lost everything, Mom," he wept. "My job, my family, everything." "Oh, Julian," I said, my own tears starting to fall, tears of sorrow for the lost years, for the pain he had hidden from me, for the grandchildren I had been kept from, not by his success but by his shame. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was the debt. He hadn't just been gambling with his own money. He had been borrowing heavily from the wrong kind of people. Not banks, not credit card companies, but loan sharks. Vicious, unforgiving men who didn't send polite notices when a payment was late. "They want their money, Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling with a terror so profound it made my own blood run cold. $800,000. They gave me until last week. But I don't have it. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. They're looking for me. They said they would kill me. Kill him." His words seemed to hang in the air, a physical, monstrous presence. My son. My only child. His life was in danger. All the years of hurt, of neglect, of lonely birthdays and unanswered phone calls, they all dissolved in that single terrifying moment. He was no longer the arrogant, distant son who had abandoned me. He was my child, my baby in desperate, mortal peril. And the fierce, primal instinct of a mother, the one that had lain dormant for a decade, roared to life. "You are safe here, Julian," I said, my voice suddenly strong, firm. "You are home. We will figure this out. Together." I made him tea. I made him a sandwich. I sat with him through the long, dark night as he shook with fear and withdrawal, the full, ugly scope of his addiction and his desperation laid bare. My quiet sanctuary, my peaceful home, had been transformed into a tense, terrified safe house. I had gotten my son back, but he had brought the devil with him. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the devil would soon be knocking on my door. The days that followed Julian's terrified return were a descent into a kind of siege warfare I had never known. My quiet, orderly home, my sanctuary, became a fortress of fear. I kept the curtains drawn, jumping at every passing car, my heart leaping into my throat at every unexpected sound. Julian was a ghost, a pale, trembling phantom who rarely left the confines of his old bedroom. He paced the floor like a caged animal, his hands shaking, his eyes constantly darting towards the windows, the picture of a man being hunted. The addiction had its claws deep in him. He was jittery, irritable, his mood swinging wildly from a pathetic, weeping remorse to a sudden, explosive anger. He was a stranger to me, this hollowed-out man who wore my son's face. But he was my son nonetheless, and the primal protective love of a mother, however wounded, however betrayed, compelled me to care for him, to shield him. I tried to talk to him about getting help, about rehab, about facing his demons. But he would just shake his head, his eyes wild with fear. "You don't understand, Mom," he'd whisper, his voice a raw, desperate thing. "These guys, they don't care about treatment plans. They only care about money. If I don't get them their money, they'll find me. They'll find us." Thus, sent a fresh wave of terror through me. My quiet life had been invaded, my peace shattered, my own safety now inextricably linked to his reckless, dangerous choices. The first sign that they had found him came a week after his arrival. A dead bird left on my front porch. A small, cruel, symbolic message. I swept it away with trembling hands, my heart pounding, and didn't tell Julian. I didn't want to add to his terror. Then came the phone calls. No one would speak. Just a heavy, menacing silence on the other end of the line. A silence that was more terrifying than any threat. They knew where he was. They were watching. They were closing in. The final, inevitable confrontation came on a Saturday afternoon. A long, black, expensive-looking car, the kind that seems to absorb the light around it, pulled up silently to the curb in front of my house. Two men got out. They were not large or overtly thuggish, which somehow made them even more frightening. They were dressed in sharp, dark suits, their faces impassive, their movements economical and deliberate. They looked like professional predators. They didn't knock. They simply stood on the sidewalk, their cold, dead eyes fixed on my front door, waiting. I saw Julian's face from the upstairs window where he had been peering through the curtains. It was a mask of pure abject terror. He stumbled back from the window, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's them," he whimpered, collapsing onto his bed. "They found me. Oh God, Mom, they're going to kill me." A cold, hard resolve, the kind I hadn't known I possessed, settled over me. I had spent my life praying, being patient, being kind. But there was no room for prayer now. My son's life was on the line. And I, his mother, was the only thing standing between him and the men in the dark suits. "Stay here, Julian," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, steady. "Do not make a sound. Do not come out of this room, no matter what you hear." I walked down the stairs, my every step deliberate, my heart a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I walked to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind me. I faced them. The two men on the sidewalk. The devils who had come to claim my son's soul. I walked down my small garden path until I was standing at my front gate, my hands resting on the cool iron. I was a 69-year-old woman in a simple house dress, my hair a soft halo of gray. But I felt a strength I hadn't felt in years, the primal strength of a mother protecting her young. One of the men, the taller one with a thin, cruel scar that sliced through one eyebrow, finally spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "We're looking for Julian Archer," he said. It wasn't a question. "We know he's in there. We have some business with him. An outstanding debt." "My son is not available," I replied, my voice clear, unwavering. "And whatever business you have with him, you will now conduct with me." The two men exchanged a look of faint, amused surprise. The scarred man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Lady," he said, taking a step closer, "this isn't your concern. This is between us and him. Send him out. Now, before things get unpleasant." "My son is in my home," I said, my gaze never leaving his. "And he is under my protection. You will not touch him. You will not threaten him. His debt is now my responsibility." The other man, shorter, stockier, laughed outright. "And how do you plan to cover $100,000 debt, Grandma?" "Bake sales." I ignored his jibe. I looked directly at the scarred man, the one who was clearly in charge. "I do not have that kind of money in cash," I said calmly. "But I do have an asset. This house. It is paid for. It is worth a great deal more than what my son owes you. I am prepared to offer you a deal." The scarred man's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine interest in his cold gaze. "A deal?" "Yes," I said, my voice as steady as a rock. "A deal for my son's life. And for his soul." I was about to make a deal with the devil. And I knew with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that it would cost me everything I had left in this world. The two men on the sidewalk looked at me, their initial amusement replaced by a cold, appraising curiosity. They were predators, yes, but they were also businessmen of a particularly brutal sort, and they recognized the language of a deal when they heard it. "You're offering us the house?" the scarred man asked, his voice a low rumble, his eyes scanning the neat facade of my modest bungalow, likely calculating its value, its potential. "Not exactly," I replied, my voice calm, my mind working with a clarity born of absolute desperation. "I am not offering you a gift. I am offering you a legally binding contract." I had thought of this, planned for it, in the sleepless nights since Julian had returned. I had prayed for a different solution, but my faith had also taught me that sometimes God's grace works through the most pragmatic, the most worldly of means. My quiet conversation with a legal aid lawyer last year about updating my will had given me the seed of this audacious, terrifying idea. "My son, as you know," I continued, my gaze never leaving the scarred man's face, "has a sickness, an addiction. Giving him more money, even if I had it, would be like giving a drowning man a glass of water. It would not save him. It would only prolong his suffering and yours." The shorter man snorted. "We're not interested in his suffering, lady. We're interested in our money. And you will have it," I said, my voice cutting through his impatience. "Upon my death, I will sign over the deed to this house to you. It will be held in escrow by a lawyer of my choosing, to be transferred to you free and clear, the day I am laid to rest. The house is worth nearly 3 times what my son owes you. It is a guaranteed very profitable payday for you. You will lose nothing. In fact, you will gain a great deal." The scarred man was silent, his eyes narrowed, processing the terms. I could see the cold calculus turning in his mind. It was a good deal. A very good deal. A guaranteed high-value asset in exchange for a volatile, unreliable debt. "And what do you get out of this, Grandma?" he asked, his voice suspicious. "Besides keeping your deadbeat son alive?" This was the most important part. This was the price of my sacrifice. "I have 2 conditions," I said, my voice unwavering. "They are not negotiable. If you agree to them, the house is yours. If you do not, then I will call the police right now and report you for harassment and extortion, and we will all take our chances with the law. My son may go to jail, but you will not see a single penny of your money." I saw a flicker of respect, or perhaps just professional appreciation for a well-played hand, in his cold eyes. "Let's hear them," he said. "First," I began, "you will never harm my son. You will not touch him, you will not threaten him, you will not contact him. His debt to you is considered paid in full by this agreement. From this moment on, you will act as if he does not exist." He nodded slowly. "And the second condition?" I took a deep breath. This was the heart of it all. My son's sickness, it needs a different kind of cure. One that is not gentle. You have influence, resources. You will use that influence and those resources to take him today and deliver him to a long-term out-of-state rehabilitation facility. A strict one. A place he cannot easily leave. You will ensure he is admitted, and you will ensure he stays there for a minimum of 1 year. You will, in effect, be the architects of his forced redemption." The 2 men stared at me, a look of stunned, almost comical disbelief on their faces. They had come here to collect a debt, perhaps to break some legs. They had never expected to be negotiating the terms of a forced rehab intervention. The shorter man started to laugh, a harsh, grating sound. "You want us," he said, incredulous, "to be your son's social workers? To take him to rehab?" "I want you," I replied, my gaze fixed on the scarred man, the one who made the decisions, "to fulfill the terms of our contract. You are businessmen. This is a business deal. The house, my single greatest asset, in exchange for my son's life and his sobriety. A sulfur roof. That is my offer." I let the words hang in the air. The scarred man was silent for a long time, his eyes searching my face, looking for any sign of weakness, of bluffing. He found none. He found only the unshakable resolve of a mother at the end of her rope. A woman willing to make a deal with the devil to save her child's soul. Finally, he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "You're a strange old woman," he said, a note of what might have been grudging admiration in his voice. "But you drive a hard bargain." He looked at his partner. "Get the car ready. Looks like we're taking the kid on a road trip." He then turned back to me. "Have your lawyer draw up the papers. A standard escrow agreement, transferring the deed upon confirmation of your death. And a separate contract, detailing our services rendered. We will be in touch. With that, they turned and walked back to their black car. I stood there, my hand gripping the cold iron of my front gate, my body trembling with the aftermath of the confrontation. I had done it. I had faced down my son's demons and had, with the only thing I had left to give, negotiated a terrible, beautiful, and utterly desperate truce. I had just sacrificed my home, my children's inheritance, everything to save my son. My faith had always told me that love was the most powerful force in the universe. Now, my love had to be strong enough to entrust my son's future to the very devils who had come to claim him. The hour that followed my deal with the loan sharks was the longest and most surreal of my life. I went back into my quiet, now not so quiet house, and walked upstairs to Julian's room. He was huddled on his bed, his face pale with terror, having heard the low murmur of voices from the front yard. "Are they gone, Mom?" he whispered, his eyes wide. "They are gone," I said softly. "And soon you will be too." I explained the deal I had made. The house, his inheritance for his life. And not just his life, but a chance at a new one. I told him about the rehab facility, the 1-year mandated stay, the chance to finally, brutally, confront the addiction that had destroyed him. His reaction was not one of gratitude, not at first. It was one of pure, panicked denial. "No, Mom, you can't. I can beat this on my own. I don't need some lockdown facility. I can stop whenever I want." "No, Julian," I said, my voice full of a sorrowful finality. "You can't. We both know that's not true. This is the only way. Your father, he would have wanted me to save you no matter the cost." The loan sharks were true to their word. They were, above all else, businessmen, and they now had a very valuable asset pending. An hour later they returned. They didn't knock. They simply let themselves in. Julian cowered, but they were not violent. They were efficient. They told him to pack a bag, that they were going for a long drive. His protests were met with a cold, dead-eyed silence that was more intimidating than any threat. I watched as they led my son, my weeping, protesting son, out of my home and into their black car. It felt like watching a funeral procession. I had just handed him over to his demons, praying they would lead him to salvation. The silence that descended upon the house after they left was absolute, profound. I was alone again, but this was a different kind of loneliness. It was the lonely peace of a battlefield after the war is over. A peace bought at a terrible, devastating price. The next day my lawyer, a kind man who had handled my affairs for years, drafted the necessary documents with a heavy heart, his expression a mixture of pity and profound respect. The contract was signed, the deed to my home placed in a legally binding escrow account, to be transferred to a holding company owned by those men upon my death. My house was no longer mine. It was a debt waiting to be collected. The years that followed were a study in quiet, frugal survival. My life, which had been comfortable, became a careful daily calculation of pennies. I lived on my small widow's pension, the house my only remaining luxury, a luxury I knew was only temporary. Friends from my church, who only knew that Julian had gone away to a special long-term program, would ask after him. "He's getting the help he needs," I would say, my voice steady, betraying none of the agonizing truth of how that help had been secured. I did not hear from Julian directly. The rehab facility, as per my agreement with his sponsors, did not allow for outside contact for the first year. But they did send me brief, anonymous monthly reports, tucked into a plain white envelope. "JA is struggling but compliant. JA has completed his first 90 days. JA is beginning to participate in group therapy." Each one was a small, precious breadcrumb of hope on a long, dark path. I prayed. I prayed with a fervor I had never known. I prayed for my son's soul, for his recovery, for his future. I prayed for my own strength, for the courage to face my own impoverished future with dignity. I had made a deal with the devil, yes, but I had done it with a heart full of a mother's desperate, undying love. My friend Janice would sometimes sit with me in my quiet living room. She was the only one who knew the full truth. "How can you bear it, Simone?" she asked me once, her own eyes full of tears for my sacrifice. "You gave up everything for a boy who abandoned you." I looked at the photograph of my late husband, David, on the mantelpiece, his kind, smiling eyes looking back at me. And I remembered the words I had spoken to him in my heart that terrifying afternoon. "Sometimes," I said to Janice, my voice quiet but sure, "to save a soul, You have to make a deal with the very devils that have claimed it. My faith is not in the method, my dear friend. My faith is in the outcome. My faith is in the belief that my son, the boy my David and I raised, is still in there somewhere, and that my love is strong enough to call him home no matter the cost. It was a faith that was tested every single day with every meal I stretched, every bill I worried over. I had sacrificed my earthly security for his spiritual salvation. It was the ultimate gamble, a mother's final, desperate bet on the enduring power of love. And all I could do was wait and pray that my bet would one day finally pay off. 3 years. 3 long, quiet, and often difficult years passed. My life was a simple, frugal routine, the constant low-level anxiety about my own future a familiar companion. The house, my beautiful home, felt like a borrowed treasure, a place I was merely caretaking until the day it would be claimed by the devils to whom I had promised it. I received no more updates from the rehab facility after the first year. I did not know if Julian had stayed, if he had relapsed, if he was even still alive. The silence was a heavy cross to bear, but I bore it with a faith that sometimes felt as thin as a spider's thread, yet somehow never broke. Then one autumn afternoon, as I was tending to the last of my late-season roses, a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. It was a modest, sensible sedan, not the flashy black car of my nightmares. A man got out. He was tall, dressed in a simple but well-fitting suit, his hair cut short, his face clean-shaven. He looked healthy, strong. It took me a long moment to realize who it was. It was Julian. He stood on the sidewalk, his gaze fixed on me, his eyes clear, steady, and filled with an emotion I hadn't seen in them since he was a boy. A profound, heartbreaking remorse. He didn't rush towards me. He just stood there waiting as if for my permission to approach the house he knew I had sacrificed for him. I walked slowly towards him, my heart a tumultuous sea of emotions. Hope, fear, a decade of pain, a lifetime of love. Julian. I whispered, my voice trembling. Hi, Mom, he said, his own voice thick, raw. I got out. 6 months ago. I'm clean, Mom. I've been clean for over 2 years. I'm working. I have a good job, an apartment across town. I'm going to meetings every single day. He told me his story then, standing right there on the sidewalk, the words pouring out of him in a torrent of long overdue truth. He told me about the brutal, unforgiving rehab facility, about the agony of withdrawal, about the slow, painful process of confronting the demons that had driven him for so long. He told me about getting out, about finding a menial job, about the humility of starting his life over from scratch. He told me about working his way up in a new company, a construction firm, using the skills he had thought he'd lost forever. He told me he hadn't contacted me sooner because he didn't feel he had the right, not until he had something to offer other than more apologies, more broken promises. I never understood, Mom, he said, tears now streaming down his face. Not really until I was truly clean. What you did for me. The sacrifice you made. You didn't just save my life. You saved my soul. You gave me back to myself. I opened my front gate then, and he finally, after all these years, walked into my arms. We held each other for a long time, 2 survivors weeping in the autumn sunlight, the years of pain and silence finally, blessedly washing away. The months that followed were a quiet, tentative rebuilding. He became a constant, steady presence in my life again. He'd come for dinner every Sunday, his eyes clear, his laughter genuine. He fixed my leaky faucet. He helped me in the garden. He was my son again. The son I had prayed for, the son I had sacrificed everything for. Then one afternoon, about a year after his return, he arrived with a large, official-looking envelope. He sat me down at my kitchen table, his face a mixture of nervous excitement and a deep, solemn love. Mom, he began, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the envelope. For the past year I have had one goal. Not just to stay sober, but to right the wrong I did to you. The deal you made, it has haunted me every single day. He explained that he had become incredibly successful at his new company, that his hard work and clear-headed focus had led to rapid promotions, to a significant salary, to bonuses he had saved with a single-minded purpose. He had spent the last 6 months in quiet, intense negotiations. He slid a document across the table. It was the original contract I had signed with the loan sharks, the one that promised them my house upon my death. And stamped across it in bold red ink were the words, paid in full. Contract null and void. He had tracked them down. He had used his own, honestly earned money to pay back every single penny of his old debt, plus their exorbitant interest, and had bought back the contract, freeing my home, my legacy from their demonic claim. I stared at the document, my vision blurring with tears. Julian, how? With my first real paycheck, Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And my second. And my third. It was the best money I have ever spent. He wasn't finished. He slid another document across the table. It was a deed. The deed to a new house. A beautiful, sprawling house in a lovely neighborhood, much bigger, much grander than this small bungalow. That's not all, Mom, he said, his eyes shining. This is for you. I bought it for you. It's bigger than this one. It has a huge garden. It's all yours. A place for you to live out your days in the comfort and luxury you deserve. The comfort I stole from you. I looked at the deed to the beautiful new house, then back at the void stamp on the terrible contract. I thought of the years of loneliness, of the agony of my sacrifice, of the unwavering faith that had sustained me. I slid the deed to the new house back towards him. No, Julian, I said softly. I tapped the deed to my own small beloved home, now finally truly mine again. This is my home. This is where your father and I built our life. This is all I need. I then pushed the new deed back to him. This beautiful new house. That is for you. For your future. For my grandchildren when they come to visit us. You have earned it. He looked at me, a profound understanding passing between us. He had tried to repay me with material wealth, but I was showing him that my greatest reward was not a bigger house, but a better son. My love, my faith, my desperate deal with the devil. It had worked. My son hadn't just gotten his life back. He had finally, after all these years, become the man his father and I had always prayed he could be. And that, I knew, was a legacy far greater than any house, a treasure beyond any price. My home was secure. My son was redeemed. My heart at last was whole.